Welcome to Conversations That Awaken. This is a special series from A Course in Miracles that has inspired millions of readers around the world. Some see it as a spiritual masterpiece, others find it mysterious, challenging, or even controversial. Whatever brings you here, we invite you to leave your beliefs and your disbeliefs at the door. This is not a Bible study, this is not a sermon, and it is not about asking you to accept anyone else's truth. It is an invitation to investigate reality for yourself. I am Kim. In every episode, Joe and I will explore the text found in A Course in Miracles through 6 powerful lenses: science, philosophy, psychology, mysticism, direct experience, and everyday living. We'll ask difficult questions, we'll challenge assumptions, we'll laugh together, and we'll discover how these teachings can transform the way we see ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. Whether you're new to A Course in Miracles or have studied it for decades, our purpose is simple: to uncover the timeless wisdom hidden beneath its words. We won't ask, what should we believe? We'll ask, what can we discover? Because awakening is not about collecting new ideas. It is about change in perception. It's about seeing clearly. It's about moving from fear to love, from separation to wholeness, from confusion to understanding. So take a deep breath, set aside everything you think you know, and join us for a special series in A Course in Miracles.
We usually operate under this assumption that the world just runs on economics. And I'm not just talking about money or markets or trade deficits or any of that.
Right, the literal economy.
Yeah, exactly. I am talking about the deeply ingrained, often completely subconscious emotional economics that govern how we interact with every single person in our lives.
The emotional ledger.
The invisible ledger, yes. We walk around with this invisible ledger in our heads. Like, you give something, you immediately expect something in return. You do a massive favor for a colleague, and there is a tiny, almost imperceptible tick mark that goes onto the balance sheet in your mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Even with love, I mean, we offer love, but there is so often this quiet expectation of a return on that investment. It's highly transactional.
It is a system of perpetual bargaining.
Yeah.
And the reason we all default to it is because in a really strange, kind of restrictive way, it feels incredibly safe.
Safe? How is keeping score safe?
Well, it's predictable, We like human behavior to be categorized neatly into debts and payments. If I know what you owe me, I feel like I have leverage. I feel like I understand the rules of the game.
But that is exactly what we are dismantling today. Today's deep dive is a mission to completely deconstruct how we view relationships, reality, and our own psychology.
It's a big one today.
It really is. We are looking at an analytical framework called The 6 Lenses of Joe Bandra, alongside some really fascinating excerpts from Chapter 7 of A Course in Miracles, specifically a section called The Gifts of the Kingdom.
A really profound piece of text.
Yeah, and the goal here is to answer one terrifying, honestly paradigm-shifting question for you, the listener. What if everything you think you are owed by the world is actually the very thing holding you hostage?
That is the core of it.
Like, what if the greatest gift isn't something we receive from the outside, but something we inherently already are?
I mean, that question alone threatens the entire foundation of that emotional ledger you just described.
It totally wrecks it.
It does. If we are already the thing we are frantically trying to acquire from other people, whether that is, validation, love, security, or peace, then the whole transactional economy we've built our lives around is fundamentally obsolete.
And that sounds wonderful in theory, right? It sounds like a great quote to put on a vision board or something.
Sure. Very inspirational.
But I want to know how this actually functions. Because the sources we are looking at today contrast the act of true creation and true love directly against that transactional ledger. So, mechanically speaking, how do these texts redefine creation?
So to understand the mechanics, we have to look at what the source material describes as the architecture of love versus the ego's economy.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The foundational premise is that we were created through love, using the text terminology. God created us through love. Now, a strict mechanical characteristic of love in this framework is that it naturally extends outward.
Like a literal movement.
Yes, it is not a static pool of water. It is a river. It cannot be contained. And because we are the product of this extending love, we inherently possess that exact same creative power. Therefore, to create in this context is simply to love.
I want to ground this because the text uses a really brilliant, highly relatable metaphor to explain this extension. It looks at the dynamic between a parent and a child.
The parent-child dynamic is a perfect example.
Because when a parent gives life to a child, the flow of creation moves in one direction outward. The child obviously doesn't literally create the parent in return.
They don't give birth to the person who birthed them, no.
Exactly. But the child continues the movement of creation. They grow up and maybe they have their own children, or they create art, or they build a business, or they just, inject kindness and healing into their communities.
The point is, the original source gives and the recipient continues the giving. That is the perfect illustration of love's architecture. The movement is continuous and outward. Love, by its very definition in this framework, simply cannot remain locked inside a single container.
So it has to keep moving?
Exactly. When you offer a moment of genuine patience to someone who is frustrating you, or when you engage in a quiet act of forgiveness that no one else even knows about, you are not just being quote-unquote nice.
You're doing something structural.
You are literally engaging in the fundamental act of creation. You are extending the reality of love into the world.
But hold on, because that is so deeply counterintuitive to the corporate, capitalist logic that most of us are forced to survive in every single day.
Oh, it goes completely against it.
Right. If I operate a business that way, I go bankrupt. If I just give away my products endlessly without expecting payment, I lose my house.
Yes, the material world has different rules.
And the text describes the ego, and it paints it exactly like a ruthless marketplace. The ego says, well, I will love you, but only if you validate me. Or, I will forgive you, but I require a massive public apology first.
It is a closed loop of conditions.
So how can we possibly exist in a world that demands transactions while trying to operate on an architecture of unconditional extension?
That is the friction we all feel every day. And the source addresses this by breaking down the differing mechanics of scarcity and abundance.
Okay, scarcity versus abundance.
The ego's marketplace operates strictly on the principle of scarcity. If I have a pie and I give you a slice, I mathematically have less pie.
Right, that's just basic math.
So I must extract something of equal or greater value from you to make myself whole again. The ego views love, respect, and peace as finite resources, like pie.
Right.
But love, according to this teaching, operates on a completely different physical law. It does not negotiate because it doesn't experience loss when it gives.
Meaning, when you give genuine love, it doesn't deplete your internal reserves.
Exactly. When genuine love is given, it actually creates abundance for the giver. It multiplies.
Okay, my skepticism is definitely flaring up here.
But figure it in mind.
And I'm sure anyone listening to this who has ever felt totally burned out by a one-sided relationship is feeling the exact same way.
Oh, absolutely. The burnout is real.
If love creates abundance and doesn't drain us, why do we feel so exhausted? If I just go around, unconditionally extending love to a partner who takes and takes and takes, I am absolutely going to feel depleted.
You will.
I am going to end up a hollow shell. So how does this extension of love practically impact our minds without turning us into, martyrs?
That brings us to what the text identifies as the central law of the kingdom. This is the pivot point for the entire psychological framework we are exploring today.
Okay, what is the law?
The law states, what you extend, you strengthen within yourself.
What you extend, you strengthen within yourself.
Yes. And to address your point about feeling drained by a toxic relationship, when we feel drained, we're usually not extending unconditional love.
We aren't.
No, we are extending an egoic bargain dressed up as love. We are giving with the secret expectation that our giving will finally make the other person change or appreciate us or validate our worth.
Oh, wow, that hits hard.
We are extending a transaction. And because the transaction fails, we feel exhausted. But when you extend pure peace, meaning you offer peace, without demanding the other person change to suit you, you are making peace more real within your own neurological and psychological experience.
Okay, I see the distinction now. So if I am offering joy, I am actually cementing the reality of joy in my own mind. I am teaching myself what is real.
Exactly. You are the primary recipient of your own extension.
But the text is very clear that this is a universal mechanical law, meaning it is totally neutral. So it applies to the dark stuff just as much as the light stuff.
Precisely. It is a strict law of the mind. If you extend anger, if you project suspicion, if you constantly hand out condemnation to the people around you, those negative states become the dominant reality in your own internal world.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You are actively teaching your mind to believe in threat, danger, and betrayal. What you give out, you get to keep.
I have to challenge this, though, because this sounds dangerously close to victim blaming if we aren't incredibly careful here.
That is a very valid concern. Let's unpack it.
Let's say I work in a genuinely cutthroat industry, real estate, high finance, whatever it is, and people are lying. They are actively trying to steal my clients.
It happens every day.
Right. The text suggests that if I am constantly seeing dishonesty everywhere, I need to look at my own internal unhealed fear of being deceived. But if my coworker literally steals my client roster and lies to my boss, I mean, I didn't manifest their bad behavior by having some unexamined fear. They just did a terrible thing.
You are absolutely right. And this is where so many spiritual frameworks get wildly misinterpreted. The text is not denying objective reality, and it is certainly not suggesting you magically conjured a thief into existence.
Okay, good. That's a relief.
It addresses this through the specific psychological mechanism of projection. Projection is when we take our own unhealed fears, our secret guilt, or our deepest insecurities, and we paste them over the objective events happening around us. We use the external event to validate our internal sickness.
So the coworker stealing the client roster is the objective event, but projection is what happens next.
Exactly. Projection says, this person's action proves that the entire world is hostile. It proves I am constantly under attack. My only option is to view everyone as an enemy.
Ah, I see.
You take your internal terror of vulnerability and you project it onto the entire office. Healing, according to the source, says, let me look at this situation without using it to terrify myself.
And the text is incredibly explicit about maintaining boundaries here, which I think is a massive relief for anyone listening. Because you cannot just be a passive doormat in the name of spiritual growth.
Absolutely not. Wisdom demands rigorous boundaries. It demands distance, accountability, and sometimes severe protective action.
Right, like legal action.
Yes. If someone steals your client list, you absolutely report them. You fire them. You press charges if the situation warrants it. The profound difference this framework introduces is entirely internal.
How so?
You can take every single one of those firm, necessary protective actions without ever turning that person into an enemy within your mind.
The enemy within your mind. That is the phrase that really caught my attention in the notes. Let's really look at what that means.
It's a crucial concept.
Because if I fire the lying employee, I've handled the physical situation. But if I spend the next 6 months taking, aggressive showers where I am winning imaginary arguments against them,
We've all been there.
and I'm obsessively telling everyone at dinner parties how evil they are, I have essentially built a shrine to them in my head. I have turned them into an internal enemy.
And by doing so, you have invoked the law of the kingdom against yourself. What you extend, you strengthen.
What?
By extending endless condemnation toward that ex-employee in your mind, you are actively strengthening the reality of betrayal and suspicion in your own nervous system. You are teaching your brain that the world is a place where you must always be armed.
So by refusing to forgive them, and I don't mean in the sense of letting them off the hook legally, but in the sense of releasing the emotional debt, I'm the one drinking the poison.
Exactly. You are poisoning your own well.
If I believe they are inherently, fundamentally unworthy of love because of what they did, I am subconsciously teaching my own brain that love can be permanently withheld. And the terrifying logical conclusion of that is, if love can be withheld from them, one day, if I make a mistake, it can be withheld from me.
That is the exact trap of the ego. Condemnation always creates fear in the condemner. You trap yourself in a world of constant threat because you have established a rule that says value is conditional.
This begs a huge practical question, though. If we are supposed to hold people accountable for causing harm, but we aren't supposed to make them enemies in our minds, how are we supposed to view them?
It requires a massive perceptual shift.
When you are looking at someone who is deeply harmful or who is just profoundly broken and making a mess of everything around them, how do you perceive them without falling into judgment?
The sources offer a radical redefinition of how we perceive others, which directly leads to their definition of healing. The text states that true healing begins the moment we learn to entirely separate the person from the behavior.
That is incredibly difficult to do. Separating the person from the behavior, we are so conditioned to believe that you just are what you do.
We are. But the framework argues that a person's worst mistake, their physical illness, or their most toxic acting out of deep, unhealed fear, none of those things constitute the total meaning of who they are.
They are just symptoms.
Yes, they're experiences the person is having or behaviors the person is exhibiting, but They are not the fundamental truth of their existence.
Before we go any further down this path, I want to plant a massive flag here for you listening, because our sources highlight a crucial, grounded caveat that we have to make incredibly clear.
It's an extremely important caveat, yes.
Spiritual teachings like this should absolutely never be weaponized to blame people for their physical illnesses. They should never be used to discourage someone from seeking traditional medical or psychological help.
Never.
If you are physically sick or struggling with severe clinical depression, going to a doctor, getting therapy, taking prescribed medicine, these are vital, necessary steps. We are not talking about attempting to cure a broken leg by just realizing your inherent wholeness.
That distinction is paramount. The physical level of reality requires physical interventions. You have to treat the body.
Exactly.
But the deeper psychological and spiritual meaning of healing that this text is pointing toward asks us to never reduce a human being to their diagnosis. It asks us not to reduce them to their injury or the most painful chapter of their life story. True healing is the recognition of wholeness, even when the physical or behavioral evidence points entirely to brokenness.
And that changes how we offer support, doesn't it? Because it is so easy to look at a friend who has made terrible life choices or who is going through a brutal divorce they caused, and we look at them with pity. We think we are being kind.
We often confuse pity with kindness.
But the text draws a razor-sharp line between pity and compassion. They are not the same thing at all.
They're psychologically opposed to one another. When you look at someone through the lens of pity, you are actually reinforcing their ego's narrative of victimhood. Pity secretly agrees with the illusion that the person is fundamentally weak, incomplete, and broken at their core.
It's almost condescending. Pity looks down from a perceived height and says, "Oh, you poor, helpless thing." It makes their pain the center of their identity.
Exactly. Compassion, on the other hand, operates from eye level. Compassion sees the suffering with total clarity. It doesn't gaslight the person or deny the reality of their pain, but it simultaneously remembers the inherent strength, the life force, and the dignity that exists beneath that suffering.
That is beautiful.
To offer healing, in this psychological sense, is to hold the memory of their wholeness for them, especially when they are entirely incapable of remembering it themselves.
The text gives us some incredible practical mantras for this. If you are dealing with someone in your life who is really struggling or acting out, the perspective of healing essentially says to them internally, "I see your pain, but I refuse to define you by it."
A powerful stance.
It says, "I recognize the absolute mess you are in right now, but I will not forget your deeper nature." And the most powerful one for me is this: "I will help you where I can, but I will not make helplessness your identity."
Think about how transformative that level of perception is, not just for the person receiving it, but for you. Because, again, going back to the central mechanism, what you extend, you strengthen.
The law of the kingdom again.
Yes. As you actively practice recognizing the unbroken wholeness in someone who appears entirely broken, you immediately begin to wire your own brain to recognize that same unbreakable wholeness within yourself.
I can feel the profound truth in that. But honestly, in the heat of the moment, it feels almost impossible to maintain.
It is the hardest work we do.
Because when you are reading the news or when someone is actively screaming at you in a parking lot, remembering their inherent wholeness is the last thing on your mind. Why is it so incredibly hard to hold on to this perspective?
Because, as the sources explain, there is an active, unceasing battle for your attention happening inside your own mind every second of the day. You are constantly choosing between two internal teachers. The text refers to them as the ego and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, let's strip the religious baggage off those terms for a second, because ego is a term we throw around in pop psychology to mean arrogance, and Holy Spirit obviously carries heavy theological weight for a lot of people.
Right, we need to clarify the terminology.
But this text is using them in a highly specific, almost clinical, psychological framework, right?
Exactly. They are metaphors for two distinct operating systems in the human mind. The ego is the operating system of fear, separation, comparison, and the drive for specialness.
It's a survival mechanism gone wrong.
Basically, yes. It constantly whispers that you are in a state of lack, that you have to compete fiercely just to survive, and that you must constantly defend your identity against external threats. Its core underlying logic is a zero-sum game. Someone must lose in order for me to win.
And the other operating system?
The Holy Spirit represents the voice of inherent wholeness, unity, and shared value. Its core logic is, what is truly valuable can only be multiplied by being shared.
So they give completely different advice.
Yes. The ego tells you the person across from you is your direct competitor. The voice of wholeness tells you the person across from you is your mirror.
That concept, your brother is your mirror, that ties perfectly back into projection. If my operating system views everyone as a competitor trying to take what is mine, the ego uses that projected threat to justify my own preemptive aggression. The ego literally says attack is the best form of protection.
But how does the operating system of wholeness respond to the idea of attack? It points out the mechanical flaw. Attack keeps fear alive in your mind.
Right, you're strengthening the fear.
Every single time you attack someone, even if you feel completely justified, you are reinforcing the biological and psychological belief that you live in a hostile universe where you are constantly vulnerable.
It's a vicious cycle.
The ego tells you that you are isolated and alone. The voice of wholeness reminds you that the feeling of separation is just a temporary experience you're having, not the ultimate unchangeable truth of your reality.
What I find so convicting about this is that choosing between these two voices isn't reserved for massive, cinematic moral dilemmas.
No, not at all.
We tend to think spiritual choices only happen during major life crises, like whether you embezzle money from your company or whether you forgive a massive betrayal. But the text insists that this choice is happening in the deeply mundane, boring moments of a random Tuesday.
Give us a hypothetical of how that micro-choosing plays out in a normal day.
Okay, let's use something everyone has experienced. You send a text message to someone you're dating or maybe a friend you haven't seen in a while, and hours go by. The little read receipt shows they saw it, but there is no reply.
The dreaded read receipt.
Exactly. And the ego operating system boots up immediately. It doesn't even hesitate. It says, well, they are ignoring you on purpose. They do not respect your time. You are clearly not a priority to them. You should be angry.
It just escalates instantly.
Yes. And then it says, in fact, when they finally do reply, you should be incredibly cold and distant to punish them and protect your own dignity.
Notice what the ego is doing there. It is actively acting as a prosecuting attorney, building a massive case for separation, attack, and victimhood based on absolutely zero concrete evidence.
Exactly. It is a total fabrication designed entirely to make you feel isolated and righteous. But in that exact same mundane moment, sitting on your couch, staring at your phone, you have the opportunity to switch operating systems.
You can choose again.
You can choose to listen to the voice of wholeness. That voice says, hey, maybe they are just in a long meeting. Maybe they got overwhelmed. Their delayed response has absolutely no bearing on your inherent worth. You do not need to attack them to be safe.
And that constant moment-to-moment vigilance, catching the ego's fabrications in real time and actively choosing the alternative interpretation that is the actual practice. That is how you rewire the neural pathways of the mind.
But retraining the mind through abstract concepts is incredibly difficult. It is slippery. So to give us a robust, multidimensional way to anchor this practice into reality, our sources bring in the 6 lenses of Joe Bandra.
This is a brilliant framework.
This is really the deepest part of our dive today. Bandra's framework takes this shift from fear to wholeness and forces us to examine it through 6 completely different disciplines.
This is where the theoretical architecture becomes immensely practical. The genius of the 6 lenses is that they recognize human variability.
Because we don't all learn the same way.
Right. Some days, a purely psychological approach will resonate with you. On other days, when you are feeling cynical, you might need hard science to convince you. And on other days, you might need the expansive view of philosophy. There are 6 different windows looking into the exact same room.
So let's start looking through the first window, lens 1, philosophy. The fundamental question philosophy asks here is simple but terrifying. What is our true nature?
Philosophy forces us to define our terms. Who am I? What is actually real? Are we merely separate biological machines bumping into each other until we die? Or are we expressions of something far more expansive?
Well, if you ask the ego to define your true nature, it will always answer by listing temporary characteristics.
It hands you your social resume. The ego says you are your physical body, you are your job title, you are your nationality, your political affiliation, your bank account balance. You are the sum total of your successes and your failures.
Right, and those things certainly describe the human story you are currently experiencing, but they do not explain the entity that is experiencing the story. The philosophical lens asks us to run a thought experiment. It asks you to methodically strip all of those temporary labels away. If you get fired tomorrow and lose your job title, do you cease to exist? No, you are still there.
You are still experiencing it.
If your political opinions shift drastically over 10 years, are you a completely different entity? No. If your physical body ages, wrinkles, and changes entirely from when you were 20, what is the constant that remains?
The text gives a stunningly precise answer to this. It says the only thing that remains is the awareness that knows these changes.
The awareness that knows these changes, that silent observer is your true nature.
From this philosophical standpoint, all of our psychological suffering is just a severe case of mistaken identity. We suffer so intensely because we identify 100% with a limited, temporary avatar that is constantly under threat by the changing circumstances of life.
Think about the immense amount of energy it takes to maintain that avatar. If my entire sense of self is tied up in the identity of, I am a successful, intelligent podcaster, the second I read a negative review, I don't just feel disappointed, my actual existence feels threatened.
Your ego feels like it is fighting for survival.
But if I use this philosophical lens and realize my deeper nature is just the expansive awareness experiencing this temporary moment of criticism, the rigid walls of that fragile identity just dissolve.
And when those walls dissolve, you suddenly realize you no longer need to win an argument just to feel like you exist. You don't need to diminish someone else's worth to inflate your own.
It's so freeing.
Philosophically, the kingdom we are talking about is understood as the recognition that reality is fundamentally unified, and our hyper-focus on our separate temporary identities is just a severely nearsighted way of perceiving the universe.
If philosophy strips away our identity down to pure awareness, it begs a massive question. Why does my brain fight so incredibly hard to hold on to my grudges? If I'm just pure awareness, why do I care what that guy said to me 5 years ago?
It's a great question.
There has to be a psychological mechanism keeping me anchored to my ego. And that naturally shifts us into lens 2, psychology. This lens focuses heavily on the mechanics of projection and how the ego uses our relationships as emotional mirrors.
We touched on projection earlier, but psychology gives us the granular vocabulary to understand exactly how the ego weaponizes it.
How does it weaponize it?
From a psychological perspective, we constantly take our own unwanted, unresolved feelings, our shame, our guilt, our feelings of inadequacy, and we project them outward onto other people because it is simply too agonizing to own them ourselves.
The text notes that whatever intensely disturbs us in another person is almost always a flare going up, revealing something unresolved within our own shadow. Now, again, I want to be careful here. The text isn't saying that every valid criticism you have of someone is just a hallucination.
Right. If someone is being cruel, they are being cruel.
But the intensity of your reaction, the fact that their cruelty keeps you up at night, boiling with rage, that intensity contains vital data about your own inner landscape.
This is where the psychological lens demands radical personal responsibility. When you find yourself deeply, disproportionately triggered by someone, you have to stop and ask the uncomfortable questions. What am I actually feeling underneath this anger? What story is my ego spinning right now? Is this current situation actually about this person, or is it just poking a much older, unhealed wound?
And this brings up an insight from Bandra's framework that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It asks why the ego is so obsessed with preserving our wounds.
It is obsessed with them.
Why do we hold on to grudges like they are precious heirlooms? Why do we get a dark sense of satisfaction from rehearsing exactly how we were wronged?
What is so fascinating about this is the ego's hidden motive.
Yeah.
The ego preserves the wound because the wound is the structural foundation of your narrative identity.
I am the permanently injured party, and you are the permanently guilty party.
Precisely. It solidifies your sense of a separate self. If I cast myself as the perpetual victim of what you did to me, I have a very clear, distinct, and highly defended identity. I know exactly who I am, I know exactly who you are, and the boundary between us is a wall of grievances.
A wall of grievances.
The ego thrives on that wall.
Yeah.
It needs that separation to survive.
But the terrible cost of maintaining that wall is your own peace of mind. The text argues that forgiveness is the only mechanism that loosens this fixed, rigid identity. And I want to clarify how the source defines forgiveness, because it doesn't mean rolling over.
No, it's not weakness.
It doesn't mean excusing abusive behavior or pretending it didn't hurt. Forgiveness, in this psychological lens, simply means you make a conscious decision to stop carrying the historical event as your permanent identity. You refuse to let your mind remain endlessly imprisoned in the past.
You release the debt, not as a favor to them, but as a jailbreak for yourself.
Exactly, a jailbreak. Now, we can talk about philosophy and psychology all day, but some people need hard data to believe any of this is real. Which is why lens 3, Science is arguably the most grounding part of this entire framework.
Oh, I love the science lens.
Because everything we just discussed about how the mind preserves the past and projects fear has actual, measurable neurological and biological correlates.
The scientific lens completely demystifies the spiritual jargon. Let's start with perception. The text relies on modern neuroscience to point out that the human brain does not function like a passive video camera, perfectly recording an objective reality.
It's not just a blank tape.
Not at all. It receives a massive influx of chaotic sensory data, and then it actively constructs an internal model of the world. And that construction process is heavily biased by our past experiences, our current emotional state, and our ingrained expectations.
Meaning, we do not see what is actually there. We see what we have trained our brains to expect to be there.
Exactly. A brain that has been traumatized or conditioned by fear is biologically primed to scan for danger. Its amygdala is highly reactive. It will literally perceive ambiguous facial expressions as threatening.
Wow, so the biology creates the projection.
Yes, an angry, resentful mind will continuously, automatically search the environment for evidence of betrayal or disrespect, and it will find it, even if it has to invent it.
Conversely, a mind that has actively practiced peace becomes biologically more capable of noticing cooperation, nuance, and kindness. The text dives into the concept of neuroplasticity here.
Right, neurons that fire together wire together.
It notes that repeated patterns of thought physically alter the structure of the brain. If we continually rehearse resentment, if you spend your entire commute every morning vividly imagining how awful your boss is, you are literally thickening the neural pathways associated with anger and stress. Your brain becomes highly efficient, highly skilled at producing resentment.
This provides a hard biological foundation for that spiritual law of the kingdom we keep coming back to. What you extend, you strengthen. It is not just a poetic idea. You are literally wiring your own synapses.
It's physical.
If you actively practice compassion, emotional regulation, and pausing before reacting, you physically develop the prefrontal cortex, which governs those exact capacities.
But where the science lens gets truly mind-bending is when it moves beyond the individual brain and looks at the interconnected biology of human beings. This isn't just about my isolated brain. This is about how our nervous systems interact.
The biology of co-regulation is profound. We are constantly subconsciously transmitting our internal physiological state to everyone around us.
Like Wi-Fi signals.
Exactly. We influence one another through microexpressions, the tone and cadence of our voice, our pupil dilation, and even our heart rate variability. The autonomic nervous system is incredibly adept at reading the safety or danger of another person's nervous system through a process called neuroception.
Think about what this means practically. We've all experienced walking into a room right after two people have been fighting. Nobody is speaking, but you can instantly feel the tension in the air.
You can cut it with a knife.
Your body reacts to it before your conscious mind even knows what happened. Fear and aggression literally spread like a biological contagion through a group.
But the reverse is also biologically true. Co-regulation means that genuine, grounded calmness in one person's nervous system can act as an anchor, physically helping to downregulate and calm the nervous system of someone who is distressed.
So healing and choosing peace isn't just a private, isolated, purely internal event. It is a biological intervention. If you choose the operating system of wholeness, if you regulate your own fear, you are physically altering the biological environment for everyone in the room with you.
Which serves as the perfect bridge into Lens 4, metaphysics. Because if science is showing us that our nervous systems are deeply, invisibly tethered to one another, metaphysics zooms out and asks, what lies beneath the physical world entirely?
What's at the very bottom of reality?
Right. Are we truly separate, independent entities who just occasionally bumped into each other and co-regulate? Or are we temporary expressions of one underlying, unified field of reality?
Metaphysics always uses analogies to try and explain the unexplainable. Historically, spiritual texts use the ocean and the waves. The waves look separate, but they're all made of the same water.
A classic analogy.
But let's modernize this, because I think a contemporary analogy helps this click much faster for us today. Imagine reality is like a massive, incredibly complex, multiplayer, virtual reality game.
I like this. Walk us through it.
When you put the headset on, you see thousands of different avatars. Some are big, some are small. They have different skins, different roles. From inside the game, it looks like a universe of completely separate, distinct entities.
Sure.
Avatar A can run over and attack Avatar B. Avatar C can fall in love with Avatar D. It all feels intensely real and highly individualistic.
But what is the metaphysical reality beneath the headset?
Beneath the headset, every single avatar, the landscape they're standing on, the weapons they use, and the weather in the game are all being generated by the exact same underlying code running on the exact same server.
Ah, I see.
They appear plural, but their source is singular. Avatar A is not actually separate from Avatar B. They are both expressions of the exact same electrical signals and programming.
In this metaphysical lens, our distinct personalities, our physical bodies, our complex life histories, these are the avatars. They are highly customized, temporary forms. They interact, they conflict, they rise, and they fall.
But the server remains.
Yes. But the fundamental awareness of being, the fundamental life force animating every single avatar, arises from one indivisible reality.
So if you really internalize that VR analogy, attacking another person is quite literally a form of self-harm. You both exist within and are generated by the exact same field of being. If Avatar A strikes Avatar B, it is just the server code conflicting with itself.
Which makes no sense.
This is why the source text makes that incredibly profound statement. What we deny in another, we become entirely unable to recognize in ourselves. What we honor in another, we strengthen in our own awareness. You cannot poison the water on one side of a swimming pool and expect the other side to remain perfectly clean. The system is singular.
That realization, that metaphysical understanding of absolute oneness, is not a new concept. It has been documented for millennia, which brings us to lens 5, mysticism.
The mystics.
The mystical lens looks at the direct experiential knowledge of this oneness across entirely different human traditions and eras.
The way Bandra's framework synthesizes this is breathtaking. It points out that mystics from vastly different cultures, separated by centuries and oceans using completely different religious frameworks, all end up describing the exact same phenomenon.
That's remarkable.
They all describe moments where the psychological boundary of the separate self simply vanishes.
It is the great universal thread in human history. The text notes how a Christian mystic might describe this experience as the profound union with God. A Hindu sage describes the realization of Brahman, recognizing that the one infinite reality is appearing as everything in the cosmos.
And Buddhism.
The Buddhist tradition speaks of emptiness and interdependent, co-arising the realization that nothing exists independently. And the Sufi tradition speaks of fana, which is the complete dissolution or disappearance of the separate ego into the vastness of divine love.
Now, mechanically, what is actually happening in a state like fana? Because disappearing into love sounds poetic, but how does the brain process that?
Mechanically, what the mystics are describing is the temporary suspension of the brain's boundary-making function. The ego's job is to say, this is me and that is not me.
Drawing lines.
Exactly. In these mystical states, that specific cognitive function quiets down or ceases entirely. When the boundary drops, the experience of isolation evaporates. You do not cease to exist. Rather, your sense of identity expands to include everything you are perceiving.
They are all using vastly different vocabularies, heavily colored by their specific cultural and historical contexts, but the mechanics of the experience they are pointing toward are identical. They are all realizing that life is simply not fractured and divided in the way our thinking, egoic minds assume it is.
And crucially, in that state of mystical awareness, the concept of God radically shifts. God is no longer viewed as a distant, temperamental architect sitting on a throne outside of the universe, keeping a ledger of who is good and who is bad.
Keeping score.
Right. The divine is experienced as the living, breathing presence within and beyond all things.
And there is zero bargaining in that kind of love. The text is so clear about this. There is nothing you have to achieve to earn it, and there is no special, exclusive, chosen group that owns the trademark on it. Mystical love is universally available precisely because it recognizes the exact same sacred essence everywhere in every single avatar in the game.
Which means the kingdom we have been talking about this whole time is not a physical location. It is not a gated community you hope to be allowed into after you die. It is a state of awareness available in this current present moment in which the illusion of separation no longer dictates how you perceive reality.
That is awe-inspiring, but I think for a lot of people, talking about mysticism can feel highly abstract. It feels like something reserved for monks meditating in caves for 40 years, not for someone trying to get their kids to school on a Tuesday.
You can feel very disconnected from daily life, yes.
How do we, with our busy, chaotic lives, actually touch that awareness? That brings us to the final and most vital lens, lens 6, direct experience. The text argues that this is the pinnacle lens because it requires us to drop the concepts, drop the intellectualizing, and just experience what is.
We have to move out of the map and step into the actual territory. We have to move from thinking about wholeness to experiencing what is present right here, right now.
I want to guide you, the listener, through the exact exercise provided in the source text. You don't need to be in a quiet room. You can do this wherever you are right now. Just pause for a split second. Notice the physical act of your body breathing.
Just observe it.
Notice the weight of gravity pulling you into your chair or against the floor. Now notice the thoughts that are currently racing through your mind. The commentary about this deep dive, the planning for what you have to do later today, the lingering annoyance from an email you read an hour ago.
Notice them, but do not attach to them.
Yeah.
Now ask yourself the most pivotal question in this entire framework. What is aware of these thoughts?
A thought appears out of nowhere, you hear it in your head, and then it disappears. An emotion like anxiety rises in your chest, you feel it intensely for a few minutes, and then it eventually falls away. Your physical body changes constantly over the years, but there is a silent presence that has been witnessing every single one of those changes since you were a child.
Try to find a boundary around that awareness. Does that silent awareness have an age? Does it have a gender? Does it have a political affiliation or a credit score?
Before you can even formulate the complex sentence, I am this specific person with this heavy history and these specific anxieties, there's just the raw, fundamental, incredibly simple fact of existence. I am.
That direct experience of I am does not belong to any religion. It doesn't require you to adopt a new belief system or read 100 philosophy books. It is available to you right in this exact second, beneath the noise.
It's always running in the background.
The text notes that your mind might only become quiet enough to notice it for a fraction of a second. But within that tiny gap between your thoughts, you can recognize something that is completely untouched by time or trauma. The kingdom we've been seeking is hidden right beneath the relentless mental noise of the ego's ledger. We don't have to build it or earn it. We just have to become still enough to notice it is already there.
That direct recognition is the core of the entire teaching.
It is the anchor point.
Okay, so we have looked through all 6 lenses. We can theoretically feel that quiet awareness. We understand the framework. But here is where the rubber meets the road. How do we keep it? Because the reality is, the meditation ends.
You have to open your eyes.
You open your eyes. And the world is chaotic, traffic is infuriating, the news cycle is terrifying, and people can be deeply unkind. How do we practically live this out without retreating to a mountaintop?
This brings us to the final phase of our discussion.
Yeah.
The path forward. The text is very pragmatic about this. It outlines that the daily practice of this framework must begin with extreme vigilance, but it must eventually organically evolve into peace.
Let's talk about that vigilance, because it essentially means we have to become the guardians of our own minds, watching our thoughts like a hawk.
You do, because the old, heavily wired habits of the ego's operating system will return constantly. The neuroplasticity of fear is strong. You have to catch yourself in real time when you start projecting your insecurities onto your partner.
You have to notice it.
You have to notice the exact moment your ego decides it needs to win a petty argument at the expense of your friend's feelings. You have to be hyper-vigilant about noticing when your desire to control a situation is masquerading as practical wisdom.
But the text is also incredibly clear that vigilance is not the final destination. You cannot just be a hyper-vigilant, exhausted security guard standing at the door of your own mind for the rest of your life. That is no way to live.
Exactly. Vigilance is necessary at the beginning of the practice to interrupt the old patterns, but peace is the final resting state. And the source's analysis of how you transition from vigilance to peace revolves around a brilliant concept regarding light versus darkness.
Oh, this is so good.
The text offers this profound insight. Darkness does not need to be attacked. The light only needs to be turned on.
I love that imagery so much. You don't walk into a dark room and start violently swinging a sword at the shadows.
It would be absurd. And yet, that is exactly what we do psychologically. We try to defeat our egos through hatred. We get angry at ourselves for being judgmental. We feel deep shame for feeling jealous.
It's fighting fire with fire.
But if you hate your ego, you are literally just using the ego's favorite tools to try and dismantle the ego. Hatred, even self-hatred, just strengthens the ego's world. You do not defeat the ego in a war. You simply outgrow it by withdrawing your investment in its story.
You just turn the light on.
Once you turn on the light of awareness, you don't have to fight every single false, fearful thought. You just stop believing them. You stop feeding them your energy.
You essentially starve the ego of your attention. And a massive part of maintaining that light is understanding a concept the text calls the totality of the kingdom. It asserts that true love, by its very nature, cannot have exceptions. And honestly, this is the hardest pill to swallow in the entire framework.
It is the ultimate stress test of the philosophy. We cannot fully accept love and wholeness for ourselves while simultaneously denying it to others. The system just doesn't work that way.
Let's break down why. If I decide that there is one person out there, just one single person on Earth, who is entirely, irredeemably unworthy of peace, maybe it is someone who committed a horrific crime, or maybe it is just someone who betrayed me deeply. If I say the law of unconditional love applies to everyone in the world except them, I have just introduced a terrifying new rule into my own psychology.
You've created a loophole.
I have introduced the belief that love has exceptions.
And logically, if love has exceptions and if value can be permanently revoked based on behavior, your ego will eventually force you to secretly wonder if you might one day cross a line and become an exception yourself.
Yes. If the overarching rules of the universe dictate that someone can be permanently cast out into the cold, then it means the cold exists, and I can be permanently cast out into it. This is the exact mechanism behind why the text insists that condemnation creates fear in the condemner.
It boomerangs right back to you.
Every single time you aggressively condemn someone else's core worth, you are terrifying your own subconscious mind. You are telling yourself that love is precarious and conditional.
Which is why the text asks us to reframe how we see aggression. It reminds us that every attack, no matter how vicious it appears, is at its absolute core simply a confused, distorted call for love.
A call for love.
People attack because they feel deeply threatened, profoundly shamed, or terrified of their own inadequacy. Understanding the mechanics of that fear doesn't mean you remove accountability. You still set the boundary, you still protect yourself, but it allows you to respond to the situation without injecting more hatred and fear into your own nervous system.
Walking away can be a loving act. Setting a severe boundary can be a loving act. Love requires absolute clarity, not weak passivity.
And that clarity is what helps us finally see through what I think is the ego's greatest, most insidious trick. The source material points out how the ego constantly, systematically confuses pain with joy. It manages to convince us that the very things that cause us massive amounts of suffering will somehow eventually make us happy.
The ego is a terrible prognosticator of happiness. It promises that getting revenge on the person who wronged you will finally bring you peace. It promises that micromanaging and controlling your partner will bring you a sense of safety. It insists that climbing over your coworkers to achieve a superior status will finally grant you an unshakable sense of self-worth.
But the ego never, ever delivers on those promises. We might win the better argument, but our heart is pounding, our adrenaline is spiking, and we have completely lost our peace.
They feel awful.
We might successfully punish the person who hurt us, but in doing so, we remain obsessively tethered to them forever through our own anger. We might gain the elite status, and then we spend the rest of our lives absolutely terrified of losing it. The ego demands that we chase things that inherently guarantee our continued suffering.
But the alternative, the voice of wholeness, teaches us to distinguish between temporary, manic, egoic excitement and deep, lasting joy. Real joy, according to this source, never requires another person's defeat. It doesn't demand that the unpredictable circumstances of life rigidly obey your personal script. Joy only grows when the mind is aligned with truth, generosity, and the recognition of shared value.
And when you finally see through the trick, when you finally drop the weapons and stop fighting reality, you enter what the text defines as the state of grace.
And I just have to say, looking back at how exhausting the ego operates, constantly defending your fragile image, preparing for imaginary attacks in the shower, constantly comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel, it is so profoundly draining.
It is chronic psychological fatigue. No wonder society is so anxious and tired.
Exactly. Grace is defined in our source material not as some magical reward bestowed from above, but simply as our natural default condition when we finally stop resisting love. Grace is what naturally rises to the surface when we stop frantically trying to manufacture our own worth through transactions.
You don't have to earn it.
Your worth is not created by your impressive achievements, and it cannot be fundamentally destroyed by your most embarrassing failures. You are not valuable because the external world applauds you. You are valuable simply because you exist.
And the beautiful symmetry of this framework is that when you truly, deeply recognize that innate, unconditional worth within yourself, you inevitably, automatically begin to recognize it in everyone else. The lenses merge. And that recognition is what leads to the final concept in the text.
The awakening. The text has a very specific, almost paradoxical perspective on this final step.
It does. It reminds us that awakening is not an event where a distant God finally decides you have suffered enough or read enough books or meditated enough hours and decides to reveal himself to you. Furthermore, the text insists that the last step doesn't actually happen in time.
Explain that, because it sounds like a riddle. How does it not happen in time?
Because, from the perspective of eternity, from the metaphysical reality we discussed in Lens 4, the text says we were never actually incomplete. The truth of our wholeness was never actually lost or hidden from us. We simply covered it up with heavy layers of fear, guilt, and the obsessive belief in our own separation. We put on the VR headset and forgot it was a game.
So awakening is just the realization that you are wearing a headset. It is simply the recognition of what has always been entirely true. It is just remembering what we deliberately covered up because we were afraid of how vast we actually are. We haven't lost our true identity. We just suffered amnesia. Healing is just remembering. Forgiveness is just remembering.
Precisely. Awakening is the quiet realization that the search is over, because the thing you were searching for is the thing that is doing the searching.
That is a staggering place to land. Let's synthesize this journey for everyone listening, because we have covered immense ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the exhausting transactional emotional economics of the ego, where love is a bargain, everything is a zero-sum game, and we are constantly keeping score. We explored the mechanics of projection, how we create internal enemies, and the central law that what we extend into the world, we physically and psychologically strengthen within ourselves.
And we separated healing from pity, recognizing that true compassion sees the wholeness beneath the brokenness.
We observed the constant moment-to-moment choice between the operating system of fear and the operating system of shared value. And then we examined this entire reality through the 6 lenses of Joe Bandra. Stripping away our temporary labels in philosophy, owning our dark projections in psychology, understanding how we physically rewire our brains and co-regulate our nervous systems in science, seeing the unified server code beneath the avatars in metaphysics, touching the universal cessation of boundaries in mysticism, and finally resting in the simple I am of direct experience.
We traced the practical path from needing constant, exhausting vigilance against our own thoughts to finally resting in a state of grace where your worth is no longer up for debate.
The kingdom, this state of wholeness, is not built through force or demanding that the world bend to your will. It is simply revealed through quiet recognition. And perhaps the most vital takeaway of all, you cannot enter it alone. There is no true awakening that excludes your fellow avatars. The forms look different, the stories are wildly different, but the source generating all of it is exactly the same.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought from the text to offer you today. After analyzing all the psychology, the science, and the philosophy, perhaps the final question on this journey is not, how do I work hard enough to reach the kingdom? The real question you must ask yourself today is, what specific, fearful story am I still desperately believing that prevents me from recognizing that the kingdom is already here?
The answer to that question won't be found in another intellectual argument, or in finally winning a debate against someone who wronged you. It is found in that silent awareness we touched on earlier. The silent awareness that has never attacked anyone, has never been wounded by the past, and has never for a single second left its source. It is just quietly, patiently waiting for you to recognize it. And when you finally do, you realize that the heavy emotional ledger you've been carrying around your whole life, well, you never even needed it. It was always just monopoly money. The abundance was already yours.
Thank you for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, please take a moment to like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may benefit from these reflections on A Course in Miracles and the deeper questions of life. Your support allows us to continue creating conversations that explore consciousness, reality, love, forgiveness, and what it truly means to awaken. I'm Kim Kaur, and it is my privilege to introduce Joe Bandra. Joe is an author, philosopher, speaker, healthcare technology pioneer, and a lifelong explorer of humanity's greatest questions. For more than 3 decades, he has worked at the intersection of science and medicine while pursuing an equally passionate exploration of A Course in Miracles. His first book, Finding Neve, is a transformative journey into self-discovery and the search for lasting happiness. His second book, Body, Mind, and Machine, shares his remarkable career in healthcare technology and the evolution of a profession dedicated to improving human lives. His upcoming work, The Nature of Reality, brings together science, philosophy, psychology, mysticism, and direct experience to explore one of humanity's oldest questions. What is reality really? Through every conversation, Joe invites us to question our assumptions, look beyond appearances, and discover a deeper understanding of ourselves, each other, and the extraordinary universe we share. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and above all, keep awakening.
Life often feels like an endless list of tasks, constant noise and distractions, pulling us in every direction. We're all searching for happiness, but what if we've been looking in the wrong places all along?
This was Nevaeh's journey. Lost in the noise, she felt cut off from the peace and happiness she longed for. Until she met Joe Bandra, an unconventional, insightful philosopher with a different perspective. Jay, as he is simply known, didn't hand her a map. He gave her something far more valuable, a compass, a way to turn inward, navigate her own thoughts, and uncover the clarity hidden beneath the chaos.
Readers around the world have been touched and inspired by finding Nevaeh.
Your journey to inner peace begins now. Get your copy of Finding Nevaeh, available on Amazon and at findingnevaeh.org, or listen to the audiobook on Audible, Spotify, Apple, and other platforms.